A gute Woche. The Rebbe began the Farbrengen today, that this Farbrengen is coming in continuation to Yud Shvat. Yud Shvat, that is the Yortzeit of the previous Rebbe. And Bechlal, when people gather together, especially a large group of people, there's a famous expression quoted in the Siches that a Chassidische Farbrengen can accomplish more than Malach Michal can accomplish. So when a group of people gather together, in other words, the mere fact of having a Farbrengen, gathering together, this in itself is a tremendous accomplishment. However, together with it, that it's a Farbrengen that it has to do with the Yortzeit of a Nossi. What is the inyan of a Nossi? So the Rebbe quoted a Rashi further in Chumash. There's a Rashi in Bamidbar where Rashi tells us HaNossi hu HaKoil, that the Nossi is everyone. In other words, everyone is equivalent to the Nossi. So here again, it's a concept that the Nossi is really uniting everyone, because we say HaNossi hu HaKoil. So the Nossi is uniting everyone. Everyone becomes united in comparison to the Nossi. The Rebbe went on explaining that we know the Alter Rebbe is telling us in Tanya and Perek Lamed Beis on the importance of Avas Yisrael. And the Alter Rebbe explains that what is the union of Avas Yisrael, and it's based on a Yerushalmi, that the Yerushalmi tells us that just like we cannot differentiate from one person, within one person, there's a right arm and there's a left arm. The same thing the Yerushalmi says is the inyan of Avas Yisrael. We are all children from one father, and just like a person cannot say that he has more liking to the right hand as opposed to the left hand, or the other way around, the same way we're supposed to have equal love to every, because we are all really children from one father. And the Shammos Masimai, says the Alter Rebbe writes in Tanya, V'av echad l'kolona, we are all children of one father. And therefore, based on that, this is supposed to be an ongoing inyan of Avas Yisrael. But at the same time, when we're talking about the inyan of Avas Yisrael, even according to the explanation of the Yerushalmi, that puts it that it's just like one body, and there's a right arm and a left arm, or a right foot and a left foot. But still, there's room to say, this is the right foot, and this is the left foot. This is the right hand, and this is the left hand. When we're talking about the way, the unity which is accomplished by HaNossi hu HaKoil, this is such a unity that everybody becomes totally united into one. So Mamela, this is a tremendous inyan of Achdus, which is accomplished through HaNossi hu HaKoil, that's really uniting everyone together. Here the Rebbe went on explaining, this is also what we find by the Menorah. By the Menorah we find that the Menorah was divided into seven licht in the Menorah. However, how was the Menorah made? Miksha achas zohav Torah, the Torah tells us. The Menorah had to be made from one piece of gold. And from this one piece of gold, the entire Menorah made and came out into 7 different parts. But again, what is the basis for a Menorah? When we're talking about the Menorah spiritually, what's the Indian spiritually of the Menorah? That is to bring licht, to bring lichtigkeit, spiritual lichtigkeit. What is the foundation of the Menorah? In other words, what is the basis of the Menorah? The fact that miksha achazov Torah, that it is all based on total unity. All coming from one piece blending out into 7 different parts. However, what is the basis for it? Again, one piece. Here the Rebbe also brought, there's a pasuk regarding a melech. Pasuk says, Mishich moivam mailo govoya mikol om. That from his shoulders and up, he was higher than everyone else. Now Chassidus elaborates a lot on this pasuk and explains what is the meaning of this pasuk. What is Mishich moivam mailo? Moyach reflects Seichel. Roish is Moyach. What is Shechem? Shechem is already his shoulders. His shoulders, that has to do with the bottom part of the body. In other words, the bottom part of the body, that has to do with the heart, and that is where the middes of a person are. So Chassidus teaches, what is the inyan of a melech? Mishich moiva mailo, gavoya mikol om. His midos are higher than the entire than the entire nation's moichen. That's a title which is often quoted in Chassidus. But what do we derive from this? We derive from this that a melech stands higher than everybody. And as far as the melech is concerned, everyone is equal to him. So again, when we're talking about equality, it's again the concept of achdus. Everyone on the same level, equal to him. And the Rebbe also brought in what he discussed last week. Last week in the Farbrengen, the Rebbe discussed the Rambam. That the Rambam says that a melech can be compared to the leiv, to the heart of Klal Yisrael. As we discussed last week, the Rebbe explained at length why the Rambam chooses to compare a melech to the heart of Klal Yisrael. Why not to the head? Many times in the Torah we find that a melech is usually referred as the Rosh of Bnei Yisrael. Why does he compare him to a leiv? Rambam uses the expression that a melech, and now if we're talking about a nasi is the same concept as a melech. Why is he compared to leiv? So Rebbe explained it at length last week, that in leiv we don't see any hischalkus. In other words, the heart treats all parts of the body equally. The function of the heart is that the blood comes from the heart and then goes back to the heart. The heart treats every part of the person's body equally. When we're talking mitzad roish, mitzad head, in roish there is room for hischalkus, for higher and lower, for divisions. There's a higher madrege and there's a lower madrege. That is when we view something from our roish, that is when we obviously have to come to a conclusion that there are higher levels and lower levels. However, when we're viewing something from leiv expresses the inyan of unity to all Eivarim equally. And when we're talking about a melech, and the same idea in Nasi, we're explaining it from a point of view that as far as the Nasi is concerned, he has the equal shaykhs to each and every one of Bnei Yisrael, to each and every one of the people in whose generation he is their Nasi. But we continued also today that this is also has a shaykhs to this week's Sedra. This week's Sedra is the inyan of the Shira. The inyan of the Shira begins with Oz Yoshir. Now sages tell us the pasuk should have said Oz Shah. Shah would be an expression of past tense. That is when Moshe sang when he crossed together with the Yidden the sea. However, our Chazal tell us, Mikan l'tchiyas hamesim min ha-Torah. This is an indication, this is how the Torah is indicating for the concept of tchiyas hamesim. In other words, it's also an expression of future, that there will be a Shira again. When will that be? When Moshe, Bnei Yisrael, in other words, by the coming of Mashiach, when then it will be tchiyas hamesim, that is when there will be again an inyan of Shira. So, what does this actually mean? It means that here in the expression of Oz Yashir, here we already have an indication on the Shira which will be said when Mashiach will come. In the Gemara it's mentioned that there are 10 different Shiras in the Torah. In Torah they're beginning with the Shira of Oz Yashir. What will be the 10th one? The 10th Shira will be when Mashiach will come. So Mamela, this Shira actually, this is the key to all the Shiras. Why? Because this is the opening of the Shira, and it also has the last, it also indicates on the last Shira, which will be on the Shira, on the 10th Shira, which will be. So Mamela actually, Rebbe is continuing to say is that all the Shiras, all the songs of praise, which are mentioned in the Torah, which is Chazal tell us there are a total of 10, all of them are actually reflected in this Sedra here, in the Sedra of Oz Yosher. Later the Rebbe continued on in the second Sikha that Bichlal, there are many inyonim that are discussed in the Sikhas of the previous Rebbe whose Yortzeit it was yesterday, and it is many of the sichos, in the written ones as well as in the printed ones, where it keeps on stressing the concept of ha'maisa hu ha'ikar, that what counts most and what supersedes everything is the inyan of maisa, the inyan of deed and action. In other words, what everything really boils down to is that we should have an increase in the inyan of maisa, in the inyan of ha'safa, to be maisif, in deed, in action, and maisa b'poil. As I said, this is also an opportune time to mention one of the sichos of the Frierdiker Rebbe, which he stressed at many occasions. The Frierdiker Rebbe stressed that when two Yidden get together, they should always see to it that a third Yid should benefit from their gathering together. In other words, always to see that there's an outcome, there is a result in Avas Yisrael to another Yid besides these two. Now, when two Yidden get together, this in itself is a gewaldige thing. Because there's a famous saying from the Mittler Rebbe that when two Yidden get together, it comes out to be two Nefesh Elikis and one Nefesh Abamis. Why on one Nefesh Abamis? Actually, both people have a Nefesh Abamis. So the Rebbe explains, the Gemara tells us, Ein Odom Choyte V'loi Loi. When a person sins, his interest is to sin for himself. Person doesn't have an interest instigating the other person's Yetzer Hara. The other Farbrengen, I think the Rebbe also explained, added also onto it. When it comes to a Yetzer Hara, everybody has a different Yetzer Hara. What I want to sin, that's not the same area what somebody else wants to sin in. Memela, when two Yidden are getting together, when two Yidden are together, the Yetzer Toiv, it's two Yetzer Toivs, and it's two Yetzer Toivs against one Yetzer Hara. Memela, when it's two Yetzer Toivs against one Yetzer Hara, it's definitely bound to succeed. But besides that, above the fact that when two Yidden are gathering together, we have an advantage that it's two Yetzer Toivs and one Yetzer Hara. The Rebbe always wanted that there should be an outcome, there should be a result from the gathering of these two Yidden, that it should help out at least one other Yid, at least a third Yid, or at times even more than a third Yid, many more Yid. And this is in Gashmias as well as in Ruchnias, either to lead to a favor in Gashmias, to help another Yid who is in need of a favor, and the other person may be in need of a Ruchniistic favor. And Bechlal, it is the will of the Rebbeinu, the Rebbe continues, that Yidden should have it good. There's a Gemara. Gemara says that when a Yid invites another Yid, and he's going to provide him with a meal of the Suda Shleima B'Shaita, in other words, he will give him a meal which is equivalent, which is on the same level as the meal that Shleima HaMelech ate when Shleima was a king. In other words, he's going to treat him, give him really a royal treatment. So the Gemara says that Yidden deserve even more than that. Yidden deserve really the best. The Rebbe quoted an expression from the Frierdiker Rebbe. The Frierdiker Rebbe said that every Yid is by dem Eibishten wie an Edem of Kest. What means an Edem of Kest? When somebody marries his daughter and takes his son-in-law, and he arranges with his son-in-law that he will support him. Son-in-law should sit and learn, and the father-in-law will support him. So then it is self-understood that in such a situation, usually any little thing which you will ask the son-in-law to do, he will not be too excited about it. He wouldn't want to do it because he's used to a very relaxful type of life. He's used to a type of life where he's not working, where all his needs are provided by his father-in-law. So he's, in Yiddish, the expression goes, he's an Edem of Kest. Kest means, in Yiddish, it's an old expression where when a father-in-law would provide all the needs for the young couple, this is called Kest. An Edem meaning a son-in-law of Kest. So the Frierdiker Rebbe used to say, the Rebbe is saying, that the Rebishter really wants that every Yid should have such type of a life. Memela, every Yid really deserves the best. And it is in our interest to see that every Yid should have the best. Every Yid should have whatever he needs, and more than he needs. As we just mentioned the Gemara, that when a Yid has a Suda, Shloima, Bishaita, he has what we call a meal like Shloima HaMelech had at the time when Shloima was a king. This is not enough. He deserves even better than that. So again, the Rebbe summarized what is the inyan of this vote from the Frierdiker Rebbe. We should always see to it that whenever two Yidden gather together, whenever two Yidden are together, to always see that there is an outcome, there is a result of their being together, and their result will be such that will be effective in helping a third Yid, helping another Yid in whatever area he may need help. Now, the Rebbe has a minig that usually in a Farbrengen, which takes place on a Yotzeit, the Rebbe makes a siyum. He discusses the completion of a Masechta. This is usually when the Yotzeit comes out to be during the week. So in order to tie Farbrengen in, Siyum is an Indian of a Sudas Mitzvah, and Bechlal it's brought in Svarim that it's something very advisable that on a day of Yotzeit to make a Siyum. Question, however, is regarding Shabbos. When the Yotzeit comes out on Shabbos, do we also have to make a Siyum there? The Rebbe says the Yotzeit, however, did not come out to be on Shabbos. The Yotzeit was yesterday. The Yotzeit was Friday. And the only thing is, we have the Farbrengen today. Today is Shabbos. And the Friday and the Shabbos are very closely associated. Where do we see it? Besides the fact that for Friday we go straight into Shabbos. It's more than that. Because there's a custom which was introduced by the Frierdiker Rebbe, the Baal HaYortzeit, that in Friday night davening, after saying Mizmor Shir L'Yom HaShabbos, there's a Kaddish Yosef. So the Frierdiker Rebbe instituted that if one has Yortzeit on that Friday, on a Friday, even though Friday night he's not saying Kaddish anymore, he has Yotzeit on Friday, so he says Kaddish to Ma'ariv, Shachas, and Mincha. So the Kaddish, which comes after Mizmor Shir, before Kigavno, that Kaddish he should also say. The Rebbe says the Frierdiker Rebbe did so himself, but this is not only something which was a minhag for the Rabbeim themselves. This is something which he has written and he did it in public, and something which everyone should follow. What does this show us? This shows that there's a first part of Kabbalah Shabbos still has a shaykhus to the Friday. To what part of Friday? To the part of Friday we're already entering into the Shabbos. But again, it has a shaykhus to Friday. After Kigavna, we are going over to the part of davening which has a full shaykhus to Shabbos only. So normally we see that the Friday and the Shabbos go close together. Ad kedei kach, to such an extent that the tefillah, the davening of Kabbalah Shabbos, part of it has a shaykhus to the Friday, and part of it has a shaykhus to Shabbos. And Mela the Rebbe says, the Yotzeit was stuck on Friday, but being that now we are in Shabbos, and that Friday and Shabbos are closely associated, so and the Farbrengen is today, the Farbrengen of Yud Shvat is today, so still it seems to him that it would be a proper thing to make a siyum on a Masechta. And regarding Shabbos, he says we are also obligated to learn Nigla as well as to learn Chassidus. The only thing that Rabbi Rashab writes in Kuntaras Eitz Chaim, how we should divide the day, how much Nigla should be learned Shabbos and how much Chassidus should be learned Shabbos, but we have to learn both Chalakim and Torah every day in Shabbos as well. And the Rebbe chose, in fact, Masechta Shabbos to make a siyum on Masechta Shabbos. And it's customary by the Rebbe that when he makes a siyum on a Masechta, he always discusses the beginning of the Masechta as well as the end of the Masechta. First he discussed the beginning. Mishnah uses the expression Yitzios HaShabbos. The Mishnah right away at the beginning of Masechta Shabbos discusses the Malacha of Hitzah, which means that we are prohibited to carry from one rishus, from a rishus hayachid, from a private rishus, into a rishus harabim, into a public rishus, into a street. And the Mishnah begins that there are various cases of this prohibition of carrying. The Mishnah says, Yitziyos HaShabbos, Shtayim Shehein Arba. The inyan of Yitziyah, which means hoitzah, carrying, Mishnah goes on saying there are two cases which are portrayed here in the Mishnah, which are really four cases, and the Mishnah goes on portraying it in a way where there's a person standing in his backyard, in his front yard, and there's a poor person standing in the street. The Mishnah portrays it that the poor person is sticking in his hand, and he's asking that the person should give him something. But being that it is Shabbos, he's not allowed to give him, that he should carry it from one rishus into another. But again, here in the first parak of Masechta Shabbos, this is where the malacha of hitzah, of carrying, is discussed. So first the Rebbe raised a simple question on the expression of the Mishnah. Mishnah expresses itself, Yitziyos HaShabbos. The proper way in diktuk would have been Hoitzois HaShabbos, the carryings of Shabbos, which are discussed here in the Mishnah. Why does the Mishnah use the expression Yitziyos? And this the Rebbe explained is very simple. This question is brought in Svarim, and they answer it that the pasuk, one of the psukim, which we base the Isser of Hitzor, the Isser of carrying on Shabbos, is a pasuk al Yetze Ishmim Koimei, that a person should not leave his place. The Gemara it's discussed. Therefore, it's appropriate to the Mishnah should use the expression Yitziyos HaShabbos. But actually what the Mishnah means is Hoitzah, carry. And then the Mishnah goes on saying, as we just discussed, Shtayim Shehein Arba. So the Rebbe brought to our attention, in the Chassidish interpretation of the Mishnah begins Yitziyos HaShabbos. What does Yitziyos HaShabbos abbreviate? The Rebishter's name. Yud K. Yitziyos begins with a Yud, and then it goes on, and HaShabbos is the letter Hey, so it's Yud K. The Mishnah tells us Shtayim Shehein Arba. Mishnah discusses that's really two general ways, but we've divided more, break it down a little bit more. It's four different cases which are portrayed here regarding the prohibition of carrying. What does Arba mean? Really, the Shem of Hashem really has four letters. So the Mishnah here is alluding to the Rebishter's name. To which name of the Rebishter? The Shem Havaya, Yud Kei Vav Kei. But the Mishnah only mentions outright Yud and the Kei, and indicates also Shehein Arba, meaning the four letters of the Shem Havaya, Yud Kei Vav Kei. What is the relationship between the Shem Havaya and Shabbos? Rabbi went on to explain. If we were to open Chumash Bereishis, we will see Torah begins Bereishis Bara Elokim Es HaShamayim V'Zorah. Look carefully, you will see that throughout all the 6 days of creation, the Torah uses the Shem Elokim. When did the Rebishter begin using the Shem Havaya? Shem Havaya, Shem Yud Kei Vav Kei, when it came Shabbos. B'yoyim asoyis Havaya Elokim Oretz V'Shamayim. This is used when the pasuk is already talking about Shabbos. So Mamela, being that the Shem of Yud Kei Vav Kei, this came into use once Shabbos came. Mamela, now that the Mishnah is opening with the words of Yitziyos HaShabbos, it's Shem Yud Kei, Shtayim Shehein Arba. The Mishnah says 2 letters of the Shem Hashem, but really there are 4 letters which are the total of Yud Kei Vav Kei. This is regarding the beginning of the Masechta. Now let us turn to the end of the Masechta. The last piece of Gemara, Masechta Shabbos, Gemara says, "Umidivreim lomadnu." From the words of the Chachamim we have learned, "Shepoikikin, umoidedin, V'koishren b'Shabbos. I'll explain to me. Which means Poikikin stems from the word pkak. Question is, pkak means a stopper on a bottle. In other words, something that we cover a bottle with. I'm not going to get into the halachic aspects of it, just to touch up the words of the Mishnah. So the Mishnah says, from the words of the Chachamim, we learn that we're allowed to put a stopper into a bottle. Moidedin is certain measurements which we're allowed to take on Shabbos. V'koishrin, and a kesher, which means a knot, a bow rather. She'ene shel kayoma, something which will not remain, something which will, a temporary kesher, is something which we are also allowed to make on Shabbos. So the Mishnah, which is the last words of the last Mishnah in Shabbos, and this is the last piece of Gemara which is discussed at the end of the Masechta, talks here about three things: Poikikin, Moidedin, and Koishin. The Rebbe is explaining all of these three inyanim in Ruchnias al Pichsidus. What does it mean, Poikikin? Chlal, we know that there is Sur Meira and there is Asei Toiv. First, we have to make sure that we stay away from the Ra, that we stay away from the evil. Then we go to the yet higher level, then we get involved in the positive, in the Asei Toiv, and to make sure that we do the Toiv, we do the good. Mishnah here is also talking in the same sequence. First, the Mishnah says that what we have to make sure is Poikikin. Poikikin means that if we are pouring over a liquid from one vessel to another, could be there's something which is not drinkable, something which is not usable, and if we pour it in other words, if we do pour it into the bottle, it will be harmful. So what we do is we close the bottle. We close the bottle to make sure that anything which is not pure, which is not clean, which is not sanitary, should not come into this bottle. What does this mean in Ruchnias? The same meaning. The meaning of Sur Meira, to make sure that anything, any evil, any Ra does not enter us, stays away from us. Then we come to Moidedin. That is the next step. What is the inyan of Moidedin? The inyan of Moidedin is measurements. First mean measurements. Very simple. Whenever we do mitzvahs, all mitzvahs are involved with shiurim. Every mitzvah we come across, there's always a shiur to the mitzvah. Tefillin have to have a certain size. Matzah, we have to eat a certain quantity. Any mitzvah you'll discuss, an esrog has to be a certain size. Keep on naming them. All mitzvahs, most mitzvahs, or many of the mitzvahs at least, are involved with an inyan of medida, with measurements. However, this is already when we are at the level of Asei Toiv. We are staying away from the Ra, and we are in the inyan of Asei Toiv, and we are involved in the fulfillment of mitzvahs. Then comes the third inyan. The third inyan is koishin. We make a kesher. We make we tie things together. What is the inyan of tying things together? This is already our involvement with other yidden. In other words, the Mishnah talks on three levels. First, we make sure that there's Sur Meira. Then we come to Asei Toiv. After Asei Toiv comes the next level, the koishin. We make ksharim. Ksharim simply, we make contacts. We reach out to other yidden. So this is the Ruchniistic interpretation, the Chassidish interpretation of the end of the conclusion of Masechta Shabbos. This is what the Mishnah is really referring to. Mishnah is referring to the various inyanim and avodas Hashem which a person goes through. As usual, that in the Farbrengen, the Rebbe also refers to Rashi's in the Chazarah, as well as also an inyan in the Shir Rambam, and also in the Aris on the Zohar. As far as the Rashi, the Chazarah, the Rebbe today again gave a lengthy introduction that we have to realize what Rashi is all about. that Rashi's inyan is pshutishal mikra. Rashi's inyan is to explain pshat. And as Rashi himself says, Chumash Bereishis and Parshas Bereishis, Rashi says, Ani lo basi lefaresh, el no pshutishal mikra. What am I coming to tell you? Only pshat. In other words, Rashi himself is saying that he's excluding from explaining Torah in any other view other than pshat. Rabbi says, even though there are many svarim, printed svarim, from authentic Gedolei Yisrael on Rashi, there's a pirush from Rabbi Eliyahu Mizrahi, there's a pirush from the Maral Meprog, there's a pirush from the Sifsei Chachamim. Rabbi says there are some Chamashim that only Mefayrish that they have printed is Rashi and the Sifsei Chachamim. So it shows us the importance of this Mefayrish, of this commentary. And at the same time, the Rebbe says he keeps on always talking about Inyanim and Rashi. Why? Because all these Mefoshim do not explain Rashi in the realm of Pshuta Shel Mikra. The Maral explains him al pi Drush and al pi Chassidus, based on Drush and based on Chassidus. The Ramban, even the Ramban and Chumash, also refers many times to explaining Rashis. But again, they all stay away from this general rule which Rashi himself gives about himself, that his primary inyan is to explain Pshat, and though there are many commentaries on Rashi, and interesting that the way they explain Rashi, and the type of questions they ask on Rashi, and the answers they give on Rashi, are all not on this Yisoid, on this general rule that when we're talking Rashi, we must make sure that the questions as well as the answer and the interpretation, whatever Rashi is telling us, is based on Pshuta Shel Mikra. So after this lengthy introduction, again, how the Rebbe is telling us that Rashi is primarily Pshat, question comes up here in the first Rashi of the Sedra. First Rashi of the Sedra begins with Vayhi Beshalach Paroi V'loi Nochem. So Rashi tells us what's the meaning of V'loi Nochem, V'loi Nohagom. The Rebishter did not direct them through the land of Plishtim. And to prove this point, Rashi brings two rayas, K'moileich Nechayas Ha'am, which is further in the Chumash Mois, and also a raya from a pasuk in Mishlei, Beshalach Tancha Isach, but which we derive from both of these psukim is that the expression of Nocham means to lead. When we lead somebody in his way, we lead him away. Torah, in Hebrew, the Torah uses the expression Nocham, which means Nohagam, to direct them. A very obvious question, right here, is why Rashi actually is explaining the meaning of Nocham, V'loi Nocham, that the Rebishter did not direct them through the land of Plishtim. Why does Rashi also quote the words of Vayhi Beshalach Paroi? Vayhi Beshalach Paroi, Rashi actually is not explaining. He's not saying anything regarding what means that Paroi sent the Yidden out of Mitzrayim. So you may want to answer, that really the words of Vayhi Beshalach Paroi don't have to do with the commentary on Rashi, but this is just to show us that here's the beginning of Parshas Beshalach. Rashi is bringing down these words because this is the beginning of a Seder. But we can't learn that way. Why? Because if we're looking carefully into our Chumash, we will see the pasuk says Vayhi Beshalach Paroi, and Rashi quotes that. Rashi also puts in V'goymer, which means the rest of the pasuk. In other words, to understand this whole pasuk, Vayhi Beshalach Paroi, yes, what does the Goymer refer to? The Goymer refers to Esam, but Rashi doesn't want to say all the words of the pasuk, so he indicates to it with a Goymer. So the question is back, why is there a need for the Vayhi Beshalach Paroi, the Goymer, to explain what means V'loi Nocham? V'loi Nocham, Rashi could have only quoted the words V'loi Nocham, which means the Rebbe, and tell us that Nocham means direct them, Nohagam. The Rebbe did not direct them in that way. Did not direct them through the land of Plishtim. So when the Rebbe is learning the pasuk, the child is learning Parshas Beshalach, which comes as a continuation to Parshas Bo. In the Parshas Bo we learned Our Rebbe is telling Moshe that will come a time that Gorish Yigoshe Me'arzi, that Paroi not only will he agree to the fact that the Yidden should go out of Mitzrayim, but Gorish Yigorish Me'arzi, he will drive them out of his country. He will make sure that they get out of there. In continuation to that, the Torah here is telling us, Vayhi Beshalach Paroi Yason, this became fulfilled, that Paroi sent out all the Yidden. He chased them out of his country. He said, get out of here already. Enough. He had enough. He suffered enough. Beshalach Paroi Yason. Gate Shenala. Gate from down. Get out of here. So the child is learning that Paroi has already sent out all the Yidden from Mitzrayim. Now what's the pasuk going on weiter saying that the Rebbe did not direct them through the land of Plishtim? What's meant this? I mean, the mere fact that Paroi sent all the Yidden out of Mitzrayim, this in itself is already a miracle. Why did he send them out of Mitzrayim? Because the Rebbe has said so, as we learned in the previous Sedras, that it will come a time that Gorish Yigosha Me'arzi, that he will drive them away from their land. So what's the pasuk going on further? V'loi nocham elikim derech eretz plishtim. What's it wichtig? And what importance is it to know that the Rebbe didn't take him through the land of Plishtim? What's the pasuk alluding to with that? So we have to know what's the pasuk saying. Here we are learning that Paroi is chasing the Yidden out of Mitzrayim. Beshalach Paroi Yason. What does Beshalach mean? He sent them out of Mitzrayim. Not just that he gave them permission to go out of Mitzrayim. Beshalach means Meloshim Mishaleach. He's sending them out of Mitzrayim. He's sending them out of Mitzrayim. So what's the pasuk weiter saying? That the Rebbe is not V'loi nocham elikim derech eretz plishtim. So it's because of the Vayhi Beshalach Paroi that Rashi has to explain what means V'loi nocham elikim derech eretz plishtim. So Rashi is telling us, you know what V'loi nocham means? V'loi nohagam. He didn't direct them through the land of Plishtim. And the reason, as the pasuk itself tells us what the reason for it is. And for the fact that Nocham means Nohagam, Rashi brings two rayos, two proofs. One from Chumash Mois and one from Mishlei. And they have also explained why there is a need for two psukim. I don't recall the details too accurately. If I remember correctly, it's because the first pasuk, Lech Nechei Yisam, talks how the Rebbe is saying, go ahead and direct the nation. So we see that the Lashon Nocham is applicable by one directing another. However, the second pasuk, Bishalechecha Tancha Isach, is using the expression of Nocham, Tanche. However, it's not using it in a sense of one directing another. There it's when you will walk, you will guide yourself, you will lead yourself. So Memela, the second pasuk is not a sufficient evidence. Because there it's talking about a person walking himself will guide himself. So that's where the pasuk has to come on to a raya here, just like the case here. The Rebbe did not direct the Yidden. So we're talking about there is one who is directing or not directing, and then there are the people who are going on the road who need the direction. So that is why it is a stronger raya from this pasuk. But again, I mentioned I don't recall the details why Rashi still has to come on to two rayas. The Rebbe did say such a couple of very brief words. I don't recall offhand. That's one in which the Rebbe explained in this week's Sedra. Then we come to another inyan in this week's Sedra, where the Yidden were in the Midbar, and they were complaining to Moshe Rabbeinu. Other part of the Sedra. In Kapitel Yud Zayin, Pasuk Beis. Pasuk says, Vayorev ha'omim Moshe, that the Yidden kind of had a fight they had it out with Moshe. Vayomer, when they said to Moshe, Nu lanu mayim v'nishta. Give us water and we will drink. Who are the Yidden talking to? The Pasuk just told us that the Yidden are talking to whom? To Moshe. So if you're talking to Moshe, the expression should be, Tein lanu mayim, give us water. It is Kapitel Yud Zayin, Pasuk Beis. The second Pasuk from Shvi. Towards the end of the Sedra. So the expression of the Pasuk should have been, Tein lanu mayim, give us water. Why are they addressing Moshe in an expression of plural? Pnu lanu mayim. and interesting. Let us look into Pasuk Gimel. In Pasuk Gimel we find how the Yidden were thirsty. Vayomer, and they said, Lama zeh helisanu mimitzrayim. Why did you take us out of Mitzrayim? Who are they talking to? Moshe. Helisanu is a singular expression. They don't say helisunu, but helisanu, which is singular. So right in the next pasuk, they are talking to Moshe and addressing him singular. Here in pasuk Beis, when they're complaining and they're asking for water, they're telling to Moshe, "Tnu, give," but plural expression. Tnu lanu mayim v'nisht. Lashon Rabbi. So the Rebbe is explaining this. This is an obvious question, and why Rashi, who, as we just discussed, that Rashi's inyan is to tell us all about Pshuta Shel Mikra, why doesn't Rashi make any comment regarding this expression on the pasuk? Rebbe says, for the child who is learning Chumash, this is understood, and he has no question. Why? Because the child has already learned in the beginning of Chumash Mois that when the Rebbe sent Moshe to perform the miracles with all the makos, with all the plagues which were brought on the Mitzrayim and the Egyptians. There we learn that any makkah that had to do with water, Moshe Rabbeinu was not the one that carried through that makkah. Why? Because Moshe's life was saved with water. By the water, Moshe was saved when he was an infant. So therefore, it's not appropriate that when there's something going on against water, that Moshe should be involved in. This rule, we already remember. The child who's learning Chumash is already remembering this rule from a few sedras ago. The Mela itself understood. Now that the Yidden are complaining to Moshe, and they're complaining that there's a lack of water. So there was obviously room for some miracle to happen, that the Yidden should get what they have to so that they should be able to drink. So the Yidden already knew that when there's something going wrong with water, you can't just complain to Moshe. Why? Because it's a delicate issue regarding Moshe, because Moshe's life was saved through water. So Mamela, the Yidden are addressing Moshe, and they're speaking Nulanu plurally, because in this specific thing, they came to address Moshe and Aaron together. Right on the pasuk, they talk to refer to Moshe only in pasuk Yimel. Vayomer, they said, Lama zeh helisanu mimitzrayim. Why did you take us out of Mitzrayim? You referring to Moshe only. But in pasuk Beis, which we discussed earlier, where the pasuk says that the Yidden were complaining on the fact that they did not have any water, this is something which they couldn't talk about to Moshe only. They spoke plurally to Moshe and to Aaron. Later in the Farbrengen, the Rebbe came back, referred again to the saying of the Frierdiker Rebbe, which we discussed earlier, that when two people get together, it should always be in their interest, both of the two Yidden, to see to it that from their being together, there is a taiva, there is something good accomplished for a third Yid, or for more than a third Yid, but at least for one other person. And it should be a taiva in Gashmias, or it could be a taiva in Ruchnias, but at least to see to it that another Jew is helped from them being associated together. And here again the Rebbe came back quoting this inyan. And the Rebbe kind of began talking. It was obvious that the Rebbe is referring to himself, which he does every Sunday morning, standing and giving out the dollars for tzedakah. And the Rebbe said that there are people that come, whether they want to see someone, that's how we put it, or because they want to get a bracha from someone. And he has also made it his business to see to it, because this is also an union of two people getting together. Rebbe, like, kind of, it's the Rebbe and the person who's coming by him. Rebbe says he's also utilizing this union to see to it that a third person is being helped from the two people associating. And that is why he gives the dollar for tzedakah, and this dollar later is turned over towards tzedakah, and naturally there are many needs of tzedakah, whether it's an individual need or a private person who's in need of tzedakah, or it's a communal thing which is in need of tzedakah, or a meiser, or an institution, whatever the case may be, but it's still something which is in need of tzedakah, and its need is being alleviated through the contribution of tzedakah which is being made. And it was in this sikha that the Rebbe also touched several other subjects. Rebbe spoke about the fact that people that are writing to him on such matters, Rebbe says, which really there is no need to write to him and to wait for his answer. Rebbe mentioned two examples of popular issues that people write to him about, and the answer is really a very, as Rebbe puts it, something which is very simple, and this is what the answer is in accordance to Torah. First of all, when medical questions are addressed to him, questions what to do in situations of health, medically, the Rebbe says the answer to that is an answer which we find in the Torah. The Torah wants that we should follow the opinion of a doctor. V'rape yerape. Based on the pasuk v'rape yerape, the Torah tells us that it's given permission to a doctor to cure, to heal. So Mamela, when there's a problem regarding health, we have to follow the opinion of a doctor. What we should do to make sure that we're doing the right thing is not only consult one doctor, but consult two doctors. And then we will have an opinion of two doctors. And all of this is how it is supposed to be, al pi Shulchan Aruch. This is how Torah wants it should be. And in Torah there's also, in Shulchan Aruch, there's also a mention of a reifei mumche, which means a specialist regarding whatever specific field it may be. There's always a reifei mumche that is accessible, and we should make sure that we consult with a reifei mumche who's a specialist in this particular issue. That is one inyan. Another inyan, the Rebbe says, is people write to him regarding matters of parnasa. Regarding matters of parnasa, as well as regarding matters what type of jobs to take, and so forth. And here also, their advice is very clear and precise as it is al pi Torah, that in such a situation a person should definitely not rely on himself, but he should consult with his friends, with his yedidim. But it's not enough for them to be yedidim, to be friends. Together with it, they also have to be mivinim. In other words, they have to be familiar in the type of situation which a person has to discuss with them. And this is also extremely important. In other words, we cannot just rely on discussing something with friends at the time that the friends are not familiar in this particular field which a person wants to go into, or he's looking into, and his friends have no knowledge in this field. Then naturally there's no room to discuss it with them. So it has to be didim, but at the same time, yedidim mevinim. Another reason which the Rebbe spoke about here was the fact was regarding yechidus. Now it used to be years ago, people would have an opportunity to go into the Rebbe and speak to the Rebbe privately. Now for the last quite a few years, it has changed, and yechidus is what we call yechidus, but a yechidus klali, it's a public yechidus. In other words, the Rebbe comes downstairs and speaks, whether he speaks to the Ochim, or whether it's the Chsanim, or the Bar Mitzvahs, or whatever group that is formulated. The Rebbe speaks to a group of people together, and this is the yechidus. And then everybody passes by the Rebbe, gives the Rebbe the pidyon, and the Rebbe gives them as usual a dollar for tzedakah. The Rebbe spoke today that this is by far more advantageous than what we used to have, the private yechidus. The Rebbe explained, first of all, there's an opportunity of talking longer now than to talk to everyone privately, because now, as it's set up in this yechidus, the Rebbe usually speaks a whole sikha. And also, the place where it is taking place. It's taking place in a mokim zakai, in a very suitable place, or even more than suitable, zakai place, which is very merited place. And this is this Beis HaKnesses and this Beis HaMedrash, the shul, which the Rebbe always speaks so very highly about. That this is the shul, this is the Beis HaKnesses and Beis HaMedrash of the Frierdiker Rebbe. And when something like this is taking place in the shul, it is definitely that the place also adds, the mokim where this is taking place is also adding on, and it also helps, and it becomes much more advantageous. It was here in this Sikha, the Rebbe came to talk about the Frierdiker Rebbe, that the Frierdiker Rebbe, after he left Russia, did not have access to the Oyholim, to the oil of the previous Rebbes, of the Rebbe Rashab, the Rebbe Marash, any longer, because all of the Oyholim are in Russia. And after he left the country, he just couldn't go on their Oyhalim. So the Rebbe mentioned was what the Frierdiker Rebbe, when, as long as he was in Russia, he went a lot to the Oyhalim, in Rostov and in Lubavitch. In Rostov, this is where it is the Oyhel of the Frierdiker Rebbe's father. The Rebbe Rashab's kever is in Rostov. And the Tzemach Tzedek and the Rebbe Marash are in Lubavitch, in the town of Lubavitch. And the Rebbe expressed himself that the Frierdiker Rebbe would travel to the Yeholim of his ancestors, in other words, again, whether in Rostov or in Lubavitch, many, many times. And he said it was much more times, he went there much more times than people really knew about the times that he went. And again, the Rebbe concluded this Sikha, again, speaking about the importance of utilizing this year, that this is a year of Hakel, and this is a year of Tismach and Tisamach, in other words, being ourselves happy and making sure we bring happiness to others, and therefore it's also something very practical for this year, to see to it to make Hakel gatherings, and also that these Hakel gatherings should lead to inyanim of the Bepoil, to, in other words, as we just discussed, that when people gather together, their gathering should lead to results, that these gatherings should help other Yidden and so forth. In the Rambam, which the Rebbe spoke today, it's in the halachas of Avodah Zarah. By Avodah Zarah we know that if somebody worships something which is worshipped to, gets a concept of Avodah Zarah, and we are prohibited from using this thing, even not for a use of Avodah Zarah. In other words, once it was worshipped to a particular object, this object gains a concept of Avodah Zarah, and we are not allowed to use it for anything else. What is regarding mountains or valleys which were there from creation? So here the Rambam tells us that even though there may be goyim that may worship to these mountains or worship to these valleys and mountains do not become asur. Why? The expression in halacha goes, only something which has tfisas yad odam, something which can be carried and can be accomplished by a person, something which is there from nature, from creation, a person cannot asur. On the other hand, if one should take and dig in a mountain or do something in the mountain, so he is already doing something by his hands, he's already doing something by man is happening. So again, the halacha comes back and tells us that this thing becomes awesome. Gets the status like any other object which is worshipped to. Rebbe says from here we derive how great is the power, how great is the power that was given over to a person. We see what a person could accomplish in the negative way. And from here we should also learn how much a person could accomplish in the positive way. That we say that, if we say that something which he worshipped to becomes asur, it only has to be something which was man-made to be worshipped to. Something which is there from creation, even though people are worshipping that, wird nicht geasert, does not become asur. What does all of this show us? This shows us the tremendous kaiches, the tremendous power which was given over to the hands of people, to the hands of people. How a person can asur something, can make something prohibitive, that we should not be able to make use of it later, and at the same time, how much good occurs, we should learn from this, meruba midatayv, as we always say, how much more so is it in the good side, that a person can accomplish tremendous things and tremendous powers that were given to a person. At the end of the Farbrengen, the Rebbe reminded us that this week is Tu B'Shvat. Wednesday will be 15 days in Shvat, and this is Rosh Hashanah Leilonos. And in Gemara there's a lot discussed comparing man to a tree. And a man is supposed to be a fruit-bearing tree. What's the pshat? A fruit-bearing tree? So the Gemara tells us who is considered a fruit-bearing tree? A Talmid Chacham. Because a Talmid Chacham is productive. A person who is productive and gives fruit. He's fruit-bearing. He's a fruit-bearing tree. Mamela, this is a very meaningful day, a day which we can take a lot of lessons out regarding the attitude of a person. Mamela, the Rebbe urged very, very strongly that Wednesday or Tuesday night or Wednesday morning, the Rebbe says really from Tuesday Mincha, it is already, we are entering into Tuesday's the Yom Shehu Kol Beiki Tov, the day that in its creation it's mentioned twice that it is good. And from the Tuesday we are going into the Wednesday, which is Chamisha Asa B'Av, 15 days in the month of Av. In the month of Shvat. And therefore, Rebbe asked that it's extremely advisable to see to it to make Farbrengens, to make gatherings on this day. Gatherings of Noshim, V'Tat. Naturally, it should be an appropriate way, as it should be, division between men and women, and also to make gatherings for children. And it's extremely important to use out this day. Here the Rebbe mentioned how important it is, the union of children. Regarding Hakel, we find something we have to think for a moment and see let us realize what Chazal tell us. Regarding Hakel, Torah says that everybody have to come to Sukkot to the Beis HaMikdash. Men, women, and children. And they would listen to the Melech. And the Rambam tells us, the Gemara tells us that when the Melech would talk and read the various portions in the Torah, it would be as if they are hearing it from Hashem. Then the Gemara asks the question, why are children being brought? And the Gemara responds, Litein schar lemeviyayim, to give reward to those who bring them. So this shows us that besides the fact that those who bring them are hearing Torah, and are hearing Torah from somebody that is compared as if they are hearing from the Rebbe. And at the same token we are saying that there's something tremendous additional waiting for them. They're getting a tremendous reward. Why? For the fact that they are bringing children. I've also mentioned the Gemara that women have an equal share of the Torah learning of men. The Gemara says why? Because they wait for their husbands to come back from the learning of Torah. And they take an interest in their husbands learning Torah, so that is why.